The city stood still beneath the shadow of the alien ship. It had arrived without warning, slicing through the clouds and anchoring itself silently above the skyline. Its surface was unnervingly smooth, obsidian black, and absorbed every glint of sunlight, leaving an unnatural darkness in its wake. Below, the world erupted in chaos. Cars screeched to a halt. People poured out of buildings, and 1,000 camera lenses pointed skyward, capturing humanity's first undeniable encounter with the unknown. Inside the Pentagon's war room, the tension was palpable. Screens flashed live feeds from satellites and ground-based drones circling the massive craft. General Michael Eddings, a towering figure with a face weathered by years of command, paced in front of his team. "Any communication?" he barked, his voice cutting through the hum of the room. "None, sir," replied Dr. Elena Vasquez, a linguist and cryptologist. She leaned forward, scrutinizing the strange symbols etched along the ship's hull. "These markings don't align with any known language. It's something else entirely. Perhaps a warning or declaration. Or a threat," muttered Eddings. "Deploy reconnaissance. No hostilities until we know what we're dealing with." But Earth wouldn't have to wait long. Moments later, the ship's surface shimmered like liquid, and a rectangular doorway appeared. From the darkness, 6 figures emerged. They were impossibly tall, their armor reflecting a muted iridescence that made them seem both ethereal and mechanical. Their helmets bore shifting patterns, symbols that seemed alive, pulsating with an ominous energy. The crowd, still frozen with a mix of terror and awe, gasped collectively as the aliens descended to the ground without a sound. Then came the voice, not spoken, but heard directly in the minds of every person within miles. "We are the executioners. This world faces judgment." The words reverberated, each syllable carrying a weight that felt ancient and absolute. Some people screamed. Others dropped to their knees in prayer, while a few stood paralyzed, unable to comprehend what they'd just heard. Back in the war room, the chaos mirrored the streets. "Judgment? What does that even mean?" demanded Eddings. Elena's brow furrowed. "This isn't a conquest. If they wanted us dead, they'd have done it already. I think they're here for something more profound. Speculation isn't going to save us. We need action," Eddings snapped. Turning to his second-in-command, he ordered, "Ready the strike teams. If they make any aggressive moves, we neutralize them." Meanwhile, the executioners stood motionless in the city square, as if waiting. Their leader, distinguishable by the intricate red glyphs glowing on its chest plate, raised an elongated hand. In an instant, every electronic device within a 5-mile radius went dead. Phones, drones, even vehicles ground to a halt. Panic erupted in the streets. It was a small nation far from the city that made the first move. A barrage of missiles streaked toward the alien ship, launched by a panicked general unwilling to gamble his country's survival on diplomacy. The projectiles exploded just meters from the craft, their fiery plumes dissipating harmlessly against an invisible barrier. The retaliation was swift and merciless. Without lifting a finger, the executioners unleashed a beam of pure energy that vaporized the offending region in an instant. What had once been a bustling landscape was reduced to a smoldering, glassy crater. In the silence that followed, the leader's voice rang out again. "Your violence only hastens the inevitable." At the Pentagon, the room was deathly quiet. Even Eddings, who had weathered countless crises, looked shaken. Elena broke the silence. "General, we need to communicate. These aren't conquerors. There's something else. If we don't find out what they want, then what?" Eddings asked, his voice tinged with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Elena hesitated, then answered with a whisper. "Then humanity is already lost." Outside, the executioners remained motionless, their presence an unspoken ultimatum. The world was left teetering between fear and hopelessness, knowing that whatever came next would determine the fate of the entire planet. The world unraveled. News of the obliterated region spread like wildfire, a grim testament to the executioner's power. Panic seeped into every corner of society. Streets once filled with defiance and curiosity now teemed with chaos. Some turned to violence, looting and rioting, while others sought refuge in temples, churches, and mosques. Still others, resigned to their fate, watched the sky and waited. In a dimly lit government facility buried beneath the Rockies, Dr. Elena Vasquez pored over ancient texts and alien glyphs projected across the walls of her research lab. Sleep had eluded her since the executioners arrived. Her mind, sharp and restless, wove connections where others saw only mystery. Every civilization has myths of death, Elena muttered, tracing her finger over an illuminated tablet. Symbols from Earth's oldest languages, Sumerian, Sanskrit, Mayan, dance alongside the markings on the alien armor. Grim Reapers, psychopomps, cosmic judges. What if they're not myths? What if they're memories? You're chasing shadows, came a voice from the doorway. Elena turned to see General Michael Eddings, standing with his arms crossed. His uniform, as immaculate as ever, was betrayed by his bloodshot eyes. We need actionable intelligence, not folklore. I'm trying to understand their purpose, Elena said, her frustration barely masked. This isn't an invasion. They don't want resources or territory. They're here for something bigger, something tied to what we are. And what we are is on the brink of annihilation, Eddings countered. What's your theory going to do when their patience runs out? Before Elena could answer, an aide rushed in, his face pale. General, another message from the executioners. They've given humanity 3 days to prepare for judgment. Eddings swore under his breath. Then we'll respond on our terms. If they want to fight. No. Elena interrupted, standing abruptly. You saw what happened to those missiles. We can't fight them. If we do, we're finished. The general's gaze hardened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he gestured to the aide and left the room, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. The next day, Elena stood at the base of a mountain shrouded in mist, clutching a small leather-bound book. She had begged for permission to investigate an ancient site tied to myths of cosmic judgment, an isolated plateau marked by strange carvings and inexplicable phenomena. Alone, she ascended the craggy trail, her breath shallow in the thinning air. At the summit, the symbols etched into the stone bore an eerie resemblance to those on the executioner's armor. She knelt before them, her heart pounding. If her theory was wrong, this would be nothing more than a desperate gamble. Closing her eyes, she began to recite an invocation pieced together from the text she had studied. The language felt foreign yet familiar on her tongue, as though it had been waiting millennia to be spoken again. The air around her grew heavy. The wind stopped. A chill ran through her as shadows lengthened unnaturally, pooling in the center of the plateau. Slowly, the shadows coalesced into a figure, a cloaked, spectral being that seemed to exist between light and darkness. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Are you deaf? The figure tilted its head, its face hidden beneath a shifting void. Its voice, neither male nor female, was calm yet infinite. I am not deaf. I am its emissary. What are the executioners? Elena asked, her voice trembling. They are enforcers, the being replied. Agents of balance. Their purpose is not cruelty, but inevitability. They do not judge. They carry out what is already decreed. Elena's pulse quickened. Then why give us a chance? Why wait? The emissary paused, its presence radiating an unsettling calm. Because humanity teeters on the edge of its potential. You are not yet condemned, but neither are you redeemed. I was summoned to offer a path. What path? It extended a shadowy hand. Convince them. Show them your worth. But beware, your window is narrow, and your flaws are many. If they find you lacking, there will be no appeal. Back at the base, Eddings greeted Elena as she descended, her face pale but resolute. Well, he asked. There's still hope, she said, gripping the book tightly. But we'll need to confront them directly. There's no time for half measures. Edding studied her for a moment before nodding. Then let's give them something to consider. The executioners stood at the center of the desolate city square, their towering forms as still as statues. Around them, the remnants of humanity gathered, leaders, scientists, soldiers, and civilians, summoned by desperation and fear. The 3-day deadline loomed heavy over them, like a storm on the verge of breaking. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. In her hands, she clutched the ancient book that had led her to the emissary of death. Beside her walked General Michael Eddings, his usual confidence tempered by grim determination. The leader of the executioners, marked by its glowing red glyphs, inclined its head slightly as the humans approached. Its voice resonated directly in their minds, smooth yet implacable. "You have come to speak. Make your case." Elena took a steadying breath. "We know who you are. Enforcers of balance, agents of inevitability. You don't act out of malice, but out of obligation." She held the book aloft. "But we were told there is still a chance, a path for redemption." The leader's glyphs pulsed once, like a heartbeat, a fleeting chance. "Your kind has squandered countless opportunities. Why should this time be different?" Elena hesitated, searching for the right words, but it was Eddings who spoke first. "Because we're not defined by our failures," he said, his voice steady. "Yes, we're flawed. Yes, we've made mistakes. But we're also capable of incredible acts of courage, compassion, and ingenuity. You've seen us at our worst. Let us show you our best." The executioners were silent, their forms unyielding as the seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, the leader raised a hand, and a glowing sigil appeared in the air before them. "If you wish to prove yourselves, you must act as one. Humanity must unite, or your end will come." The sigil split into countless fragments of light, scattering across the globe. The leader's voice continued, "Bring the pieces together. In unity, there is salvation. You have 24 hours." The fragments descended upon the earth like falling stars, and a broadcast from the executioners reached every screen and device still operational. Their challenge was clear: collect and assemble the pieces before time ran out. Across the globe, governments scrambled to organize, yet the task was monumental. The fragments had landed in remote jungles, icy tundras, bustling cities, and war zones. Elena worked tirelessly alongside Eddings to coordinate the effort. "This isn't just a test of logistics," she said, her voice strained. "It's a test of trust. If we can't put aside our differences, we'll fail." For a moment, it seemed impossible. Countries argued over territorial disputes. Militias refused to cooperate. But as the hours ticked away, something began to shift. Stories of extraordinary collaboration emerged. Rival factions in a desert war zone laying down their arms to retrieve a fragment together. Villagers in the Himalayas braving avalanches to carry a piece down to the nearest collection site. Scientists across borders pooling resources to decode the sigils. Still, not everyone embraced the challenge. Some refused to act, dismissing it as futile. Others sought to hoard fragments for leverage. Humanity's worst tendencies flared alongside its best, leaving the outcome uncertain. With only minutes left, Elena and Eddings stood in the command center, monitoring the assembly site, a vast holographic grid where fragments from across the world were being pieced together. A shimmering outline of the sigil began to take shape, but there were still gaps. "We're running out of time," Eddings said grimly. Elena refused to give up. "We have to believe in them." Suddenly, a message came through. The last fragment, carried by a team of volunteers from a storm-ravaged island, was en route. The room held its collective breath as the fragment was placed into the grid, completing the sigil just as the final second ticked away. The holographic symbol glowed brilliantly, then dissolved into a beam of light that shot into the sky, splitting the clouds and illuminating the executioners. The leader of the executioners stepped forward, its glyphs pulsating rhythmically. "You have achieved unity, if only for a moment. It is enough for now." Elena's knees nearly gave out in relief, but the leader's next words struck like a hammer. Humanity has earned a reprieve, not absolution. You are granted 1 century to prove that your unity is not fleeting. If you falter, we will return, and there will be no second chances. The executioners turned as one, their towering forms retreating toward their ship. As they ascended, the vessel shimmered, folding in on itself until it disappeared without a trace. The city square was silent as the crowd processed what had just transpired. Finally, Eddings broke the quiet. "A century," he said, his voice heavy. "That's not much time." "It's enough," Elena replied, her gaze fixed on the sky. "If we use it wisely." As the crowd began to disperse, whispers of hope mingled with uncertainty. Governments pledged reforms. Communities vowed to remember the lesson. Yet the shadow of the executioner's promise lingered, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Elena stood alone for a moment, clutching the ancient book. The emissary's warning echoed in her mind. "I will return. Be ready." With a deep breath, she turned and walked into the uncertain dawn of humanity's second chance.